So today we're privileged to have some great minds and people that are willing to give us as much of their brains as we'll let them. So we're going to start first of all by just introducing, this is Matt Gardner. He's the managing partner from the Pitt Road Fund. And then we have Elliot Parker, get these in the right order. He's the CEO at High Alpha Innovation. And I'm going to read a little bit of a bio for him. They partner with corporations which create tangible innovation through the launch of new venture studios and startups. Previously, Mr. Elliott led business design at High Alpha, the Indianapolis-based venture studio. His team was responsible for sourcing and developing the concepts that High Alpha launches as 5 to 6 new startups each year. Prior to joining High Alpha, Elliott worked in strategic counseling, corporate venturing, and as an entrepreneur to bring new ideas to market. Most recently, Mr. Elliott was a consultant at InnoSight, the strategy and innovation firm founded by Clayton Christensen, where he helped companies around the world apply the theory of disruptive innovation to define strategies for growth, develop information systems, and launch transformative new businesses. Early in his career, Mr. Elliott became interested in innovation while working with Fortune 100 companies to identify and commercialize alternative uses for their inventions. Later, as a manager of new ventures for a global medical diagnostics firm, he helped pilot corporate startups and invest in external ventures. As an independent entrepreneur, he has designed and launched several startup companies as a founder, advisor, or investor. Originally from California, Mr. Elliott has earned a BS in finance from BYU, an MBA from UCLA, Anderson School of Management, where he was a venture fellow. Then we have Mr. Rod Reason. He's the CEO and co-founder of a company that I think many of us have heard of called Springbuck. And that's a health data analytics solution with a vision to prevent disease with data. Before launching Springbuck, Rod founded and scaled a fee-based merit benefits consulting firm into one of the largest in the Midwest when it was acquired by a publicly traded firm in 2010. In 2009, he launched the nationally recognized Healthiest Employers Award program that has recognized thousands of employers at the top healthiest workplaces across America. From those learnings, Rod dreamed of a day where employers could make the best unencumbered decisions using data. That passion drove him to co-found Springbuck, which now represents more than 4,000 employers, including hundreds of household brands. His energy is contagious, and the world is benefiting from his vision to disrupt healthcare. Matt, I'm going to have to let you tell a little bit more about yourself since all I told you was a managing partner.
Jerk. Hi. My name's Matt Gardner. I run the Notre Dame's Venture Capital Fund. We've been at it now for a little over 4.5 years. We have about 100 startups now behind our belt. Kelly Rich, who's here as well. There she is, hand in the back. So about 100 startups. So I think we have a lot of blood when it comes to how to launch a startup. So hopefully that will be beneficial.
Okay, so we're going to let them give just a small startup statement of what they, no pun intended there, about what it's like to do a startup or the environment here in Indiana. And then we'll start letting you bring in questions. So are you handling the Slido?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe it's up. Yeah.
Okay, so Matt's got the Slido up. So if you want to log into it, is it number 5 still? Oh no, it's number 6. So it's 2022-6. And we'll go ahead with Rod. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about what you think.
Elliot's glad that I got called first. So I'm curious, just in the room here, how many of you are startup founders? Okay, good. Just to get to know the audience here, and of course we have folks online. I'm born and raised in Indiana. My dad was a factory worker for 32 years. One thing that's unique, I guess, about me, I've never worked for a company that I didn't start, which just makes me weird. Or as my brother would say, is you'd have a hard time working in a corporate job because I just like to do things my own way. I'm excited about this time to talk through what is the environment in Indiana. These two guys represent the venture side of it, so they represent more companies. Mine's more of a personal story, so I think you're going to get a good feel for what it's like, both contextually from a data perspective, hundreds of startups, and then 40 or so that have been born out of High Alpha. I'm just going to tell a personal story about what it's like to go try to raise capital and all of the frustration around that. And seriously, use this as a guide to make this session really, really awesome. I'm not trying to take over by any means, please, but ask questions. That's what we're here for. That's why we spent the time to come up, is to help other entrepreneurs go through not have to go through the pains that we've had to go through, and allow you to learn from our mistakes. We're not here to give advice necessarily, but to just say, hey, don't have to go through the same pains. All you.
Good. So our topic today is building a successful startup in Indiana. A couple things on that. I feel very unqualified to talk on this subject. I run a startup that builds other startups. And I think the entrepreneurial mindset, success is always ahead of you. And so to define what a successful startup means even is an open question. But I'm happy to share today what I've learned in that journey of running a company now that is successfully building startups all over the place. So we're on the way and learning quite a bit. So I will say that. The other thing about the topic, I'll put it out a little bit of a controversial take maybe to kick things off, which always makes panels good. I've moved to Indiana twice, once from California, where I'm from, and 4 years ago from Massachusetts. I lived in Boston. I love Indiana. We've chosen to live in Indiana twice. I've started companies in lots of different places. I think Indiana is a fantastic place to start companies for a lot of reasons. And that phrase, how to build a successful startup in Indiana, I'd almost lop off the in Indiana part. It's building a successful startup anywhere has many similarities. And if anything, I think there are benefits to doing it in Indiana. So that might be the controversial part of it, where most people often assume, building a startup is hard, period. I don't think it's necessarily any harder in Indiana. In fact, I've chosen to be here because I think for many reasons, it's actually a better place to do it than in other places.
So being here, we came from Utah. A few of us came from Utah, and there we worked at the University of Utah, and we saw about 20 startups a year be launched there. And so when we came to Notre Dame, we were thinking we could just copy and paste kind of what we were doing there and just bring it over to Notre Dame. That did not work at all. We had to basically rebuild everything from kind of the foundations. And what we learned through this is that the more and more we peered into kind of what made a successful startup, we realized it was really just staying tuned to the fundamentals of what a business actually is and not losing sight of the fundamentals. And that just has ring true more and more and more. It seems that every time something gets complex, the answer is pretty fundamental every time. And so that's kind of been the insights we've gleaned over just, there and here in Notre Dame. But to Elliot's point, there's no real difference. Indiana, Utah, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's about fundamentals of just what a business is that we're trying to focus on now.
I was just going to add the early days of a startup are plagued with things that you didn't know. And so as an entrepreneur, we tend to like to have everything in buckets and understand what we're up against. And that's the part that is new when you start a new startup. So I really appreciate the panel and the scope of what's going to be represented here. So Matt, did you have a question, or does anybody have any questions that they want to start with here?
Yeah, so I put together just a few questions that I'd just like to ask the panel as well. I'm just curious from your standpoint, the stress. How do you actually deal with stress? Because that is one of the big factors I'm seeing in a lot of these companies, and that's a true issue. And so I'm just curious, the idea of well-being for the founding team, but also the early employees of company. How are you guys managing stress? I'm curious. This goes for both of you.
It's a hard question. I can take a crack at it. Yeah, I mean, my answer to that, first of all, is marry well. That's barring that, that's a that helps a lot for sure. I think it is a real issue for founders, mental health. And I'm glad over the last few years it's become more of a thing that we talk about, actually, especially for founders. It's so important. In the intro, I mentioned I used to work with Clayton Christensen. He told a story, he used to tell a story in his early days in his career. Many people don't know this about Clay, but he switched careers midstream, early 40s. He decided to go back to grad school and get his PhD. Before that, he had been a CEO for a number of years of a small company, and he went to tells the story of he was at a company picnic where he saw that all his employees were there with their families, and one of his employees had been having just a really stressful time at work, a really hard time at work, and he realized in seeing her there with her family that stress was surely being felt at home with her spouse and kids. And he realized in his role as a CEO how important it was for setting the tone in the company so that stress wasn't impacting his employees' children. It's a thing across startups are stressful. It's really, really hard. You choose this life, or maybe it chooses you. You don't choose it. I don't know, but it's something for sure to keep at the forefront. I don't know how to deal with it very well, other than to keep perspective and to stay grounded and recognize that in the grand scheme of things, like I tell my team all the time, very devoted to making sure our business is successful. It takes a lot of work. At the same time, it's not the number one thing on my list of priorities. It's probably in the top 5, but I have to think about it. There are a lot of other things in my life that are a lot more important, and I hope that's true for all my employees too. It's hard to manage stress in a startup, but I think keeping perspective that way. Here's another example. I was talking to a founder that we're recruiting to run one of our companies the other night. He's trying to decide, should I go take another job or should I become CEO of this startup and go run it? And I was walking through with him and his wife explaining, here's what it's like to be a CEO of to found a company. It's really hard. It's really stressful. The good news is, if it fails, you're going to end up right back where you are right now, looking for a job. So it's really not that risky in the end. If you think about it that way, it's over the next year, you'll figure out if this thing's going to work or not. And the worst case is you have to go get a job at the end. Well, that's what you would do otherwise right now anyway. So go for it, do it. And so I think keeping perspective helps. That's easy to say. It's hard in the moment, of course.
There's a lot going on with this question. I don't think stress necessarily is bad. If you think about stress in the manufacturing process, you're going to stress test your product to make sure that it's at the right quality to be able to move forward. We all go through levels of stress, and it's not necessarily bad. Athletes go through it. Good athletes put themselves to high levels of stress through practice so that they can perform really well in the field. So stress is about managing good stress versus bad stress. So just to level set there. I also think that, in this age, when we started Springbuck in 2015, the work environment was entirely different. The millennial generation was just becoming the largest segment of the working population, and the work from anywhere culture really hadn't came to its own like it is today post-COVID. And so we're an entirely different world where we think of even the post-World War II era, where work was pick a job, stay there for a lifetime, versus today, it's like, well, I'll go try that for a couple of months, and I expect to get massive raises and massive pay increases in very short order. It's an entirely different environment. So the stress that you may read about in a work environment from a CEO perspective is entirely different than what it is today. We're experiencing things that you could go ask Clay about, and he's like, it's all new. So not even knowing how to manage an environment that is just entirely new. So personally, from just a work environment, one of the things that's happened in that work age from World War II to today is that there's this always on expectation. And that, when you think about stress from that level, is bad in that if we expect that people are always on, we probably push our teams and ourselves to a point where you have breakage. And I personally believe that when you find something that you love to do, I love my business. I love what I do. And so there are stressful components around it, but I go to bed thinking about it. I wake up in the middle of the night, as you saw me pull out a notebook, and I'm writing notes about it. It's just what I love to do. If you go into a job that you don't love to do, you're going to hate it, and you're going to have a lot of undue stress because you put yourself in it. But if you love what you do, you're going to enjoy every minute of every day, of every problem that you go to solve, because you're excited about it. And that's just how we should perceive work, is that it's a good thing. When we can match the problems that are in society or in the business that we're going out to set to solve with the natural talents that we've been gifted with, boy, that's an explosion of innovation and excitement. And I mean, I see a lot of shaking the heads. When you find that moment, it's fun, right? And that's how it should be. So obviously I have fun doing what I do. So
I'm just curious on that too, the kind of the future of work and this post-COVID era. How has that influenced kind of both of your companies and kind of the strategy you guys are moving forward when it comes to what a corporation actually is today? How is this post-COVID era affected you guys? I'm curious.
I'm happy to launch. We started in Indianapolis. I live on the north side of Indy, so it's about 45 minutes to downtown Indy. But we chose to be downtown, launched the business there, and our environment was very familial. We call ourselves more of a community, and it was a culture that I was very intentional about when we built the business. Wanted to bring in people that were like-minded, that wanted to tackle big problems. We were in our interview process, we would even say, listen, this is going to be hard work. We didn't try to sugarcoat it. There's going to be a lot of problems that we're going to go solve and figure out together, but we're going to figure them out. We're in this together. Win together is one of our core values. And as the market has changed and as we've scaled, we are now an entirely work from anywhere culture. We have people in 27 states, 115 employees. Our office downtown Indianapolis is basically a post office box. We have about 300 square feet, and nobody is in it. So we've gone from being very close knit group to being now national, and entirely work from anywhere culture. So we've had to, in the startup world, we call it a pivot. I mean, it's a cultural pivot, and we lost a lot of folks, and some may listen to this. We've lost a lot of folks that wanted that approach of being able to rub shoulders, be close to each other. And now we've kind of turned that tide, and we have a group of people that prefer the work from anywhere culture. So it's a tough battle. We've gone through it, and now we're thriving because we can hire exceptional talent from anywhere across the world and accomplish amazing things with the team that we have.
Yeah, I agree with that. We launched High Alpha Innovation February of 2020. It's just an awesome time to start a new company. And there were three of us, and we cheated a little bit, right? We spun it out of a venture studio, High Alpha, and we leveraged the name and some of the expertise and the help to get going. But we started February 2020 with 3 employees. Now we're 45.
Jeez.
And we're in, I think it's 18 states. So similar. For me, there are pros and cons, right? The benefit is, boy, we can hire people anywhere. That's amazing. And that's been incredibly helpful to our business. The downside is we're all trying to figure out how this works, right? Over the last couple of years, what does it mean to work remotely all the time? How do you develop a culture that's sustainable? How do you just stay connected to your colleagues? How do you get big things done? How do you problem solve? Boy, there's so many times we miss getting in front of the whiteboard with peers because you can't. So we've had to be very deliberate about how we solve some of those problems in this environment, and it's not easy. But overall, on that, I think it's been a boon. It's been fantastic, actually.
Let me ask you on that. We have lost a few pretty talented engineers to what we're calling coastal compensation packages. I mean, now we're competing because the employment is now, the world is flat in a way. How has that influenced or affected how you guys go about the hiring process? I'm curious.
I agree with what you just said. I think that there is a leveling effect in a work from anywhere culture. We felt it from an operational perspective when you're hiring in. What we would have said in 2015, and High Alpha probably would have said this early on, in starting a startup in Indiana, you get Midwest values, you get Midwest hard work. It's just a Midwest mentality. Those of you that are from the Midwest, you know what I'm talking about. And that's now gone because now you're literally recruiting from anywhere in the world. And so some of the strengths that we once had have somewhat dissipated. The other key thing was that when recruiting from Indiana, your compensation, and this is the folks may not want to share this, but I'll just share it. Your compensation range is much lower. That bell curve at the middle of the bell curve or right at the bell curve is much less than when you start to include the coasts. And so you have to compete at a different level. It challenges your business model, the economic model to which you go to market, how you price. Everything has been turned on its head because of a work from anywhere culture. All good. If you think about it from an Indiana perspective, means that Indiana folks are now getting wages that are that were once sub-coastal wages, which I think is a good thing for our state and for any other state. But it's a paradigm that you have to think through when starting a business here. Is you are definitely competing with the coast and or prettier places to live or warmer places to live. It doesn't snow on April whatever 17th when it snowed here in Indiana or in Westfield. So those are just things that you have to combat. The good side of it is I think that's good. Capitalism is ultimately what it drives is good competition. What we're now seeing is a really hard opportunity and I think a good one for businesses to say, what are the differences to Springbuck versus somewhere else, or your business versus somewhere else? And so it challenges you as both the leaders in your company and the CEO to say, how do we create cultural differences? And I do think you can create a culture in a work from anywhere environment. Absolutely can. It's by the people you hire.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I say bring it on. I think it's good on that for everybody. But boy, it's hard in the moment sometimes. We had an engineer, lead engineer, one of our startups recently got offered an outrageously lucrative job offer. I won't say it because it'll make everybody want to switch their majors. Maybe I should. I've been trying to talk I've got 3 kids in college. I've been trying to convince them to go into coding ever since, and even this didn't convince them. I couldn't do it. But it's we're seeing people get picked off like that, and it is really hard to compete. It forces you to step up your game and think through, well, what else do we have to offer? I can't offer this person that amount of money in a young startup. But what can I offer that's better or different that might solve some of their jobs to be done or the needs that they have?
I'm curious too. We have a company. Well, there's two of our companies. We've realized the true impact of culture, and one of our companies, their company is now global, similar to where they're everywhere. And so the CEO, I spoke with him the other day. And he was in Singapore and then Italy and then Scotland. And then, when he's having these little parties and I'm trying to tell him, what is his strategy on culture? So I'm curious on Elliot, well, both yours, you mentioned a little bit on employees. What is the actual tactics or strategies you guys are trying to create that unit with it? Because, I'm just curious on the strategies now of how you guys are trying to establish a culture within such a decentralized organization.
Boy, we've been trying to be very deliberate about it, as mentioned. In fact, we've got a wonderful young employee on our team who leads this effort, who thinks about it full time as her job, and she's awesome at it. She's so good at it. We've done a few things that we've implemented, some tips and tricks, like little tools that we use. We do our team collaborates on Slack, for example, and my favorite part of our Slack channel is the High Alpha Innovation Little Celebrations channel, we call it, where people can go on. We've got this service we use called Tacos, where employees can give each other tacos on this channel to say good job, thanks. And it's so fun at the end of every day to go through that and just see everybody saying thanks to their peers and colleagues. That's really helpful. Another tool we use is this thing called Donut Chats. It's another software startup somewhere that somebody created that enables, it creates virtual donut chats, assigns you to people and forces you to interact with your colleagues in a non-work way for 30 minutes once a month. So there's some little just kind of deliberate tools like that. We also bring everybody together physically on our team once a quarter. This is incredibly expensive to do. But the way that we view is that we're not paying rent for 45 people, and this is just what you have to do with a remote company. So we get everybody together once a quarter. The primary objective there is just fun and team bonding. Of course, we do all sorts of training and updates and things too, but the primary objective is just making sure the team can work well together. So it just, you have to be very, very deliberate about it. It's not going to happen automatically. Your culture will get defined for you if you're not trying to proactively define it yourself.
Yeah, to launch off on what Elliot just ended on, when we did, prior to doing our Series A, we were 7 employees, and we all knew each other. We were in this hole of an office, and it was awesome with a ping pong table, because you have to have a ping pong table with the start. It's kind of a joke. I'm trying to get you guys awake here. Yeah, it's 4 o'clock. So my co-founder and I, we said, his name's Phil Daniels, and I said, Phil, if we are not intentional, deliberate in creating the values of our culture and aligning, being very intentional about what those are, and then aligning our hiring practices to that, then the culture is going to happen based on the people we hire. We went from 7 employees, we were going to hire about 30 after our Series A, and so the company was going to almost triple in size with the new headcount. And so we were intentional. So we wrote out 3 core values, which are never settle, win together, and raise the bar. The win together value comes from, for any of you software folks in the room, what naturally happens in most software companies is you have your sales, account management team who are almost always at the throats of your engineering team, your software development, product and engineering team. And it creates this natural tension because the sales team wants to go out and sell more than what you can deliver, and the engineering team is always frustrated because they have. And at your earliest phase, you are selling vaporware. You're selling a dream of what you can build, and you're hoping people will say, yes, I'll buy it when you build it, and you have this tension. And we got there. And I remember bringing the team together, and we said, listen, we've got this big customer. We have 27 deliverables from a product perspective. If we don't deliver them, we'll lose the customer. And if we lose the customer, that means we have other consequences. You don't have to say you're going to get fired. They know. People are smart. And the team rallied together, and I said, listen, we need to win together. And it just rolled off our tongues, and we began to say that needs to be the core value that we're going to build upon. So win together became it. What the antithesis of win together is that it doesn't mean pointing fingers. If something goes wrong, and somebody will mess something up. We had a really, really bad test of testing an automated system to email our customers that wasn't supposed to go to production. One of our engineers that was an intern sent it out, and one of our customers might have gotten 50,000 emails. It happens, but you don't point your finger at him or blame. He felt horrible, but you work together, and so the antithesis is you point at people and you start to place blame, or on the opposite side, the white knight syndrome, where it's one person that can do everything, either a software engineer or a salesperson. That's just a horrible culture. It may win in the short term. It's the same way in sports. It doesn't work long term. It does not build a team, and it's not how you build a business.
Terrence asks a good question. I think a better title for this is how to keep a successful startup in Indiana. I work in Atlanta for a startup founded in Indiana. How do we keep them in Indiana, with a parenthesis on keep? Thoughts?
Well, as someone who's starting companies right now all over the country, I feel like I'm maybe not qualified to answer this one. We have a company in Atlanta ourselves. I think it's not a competition between states, and the good companies can exist anywhere. If a company starts in Indiana, wants to move to Atlanta, that's great. Again, it's whatever works best for people, wherever they need to be and live is fine for me. I don't know, the idea that we need to think about how to actively keep startups in Indiana. If startups want to go somewhere else, that's great. I think Indiana does fantastic things. I think in most cases, companies are going to be making a mistake moving out of the state, because it is a wonderful environment to be building a company. But I don't know, maybe it's things like this, just helping people recognize the benefits of starting a company here and staying here, and helping spread that word a little bit, so they're considering their options carefully. But I don't think we should worry too much if a startup's leaving Indiana and going to Atlanta. Personally.
Yeah, I don't think that's the right question. I think the question is, how do you get more startups started in Indiana? Because the reality is, when a company is started here, you're going to employ people here, and you're going to provide prosperity here and wealth here. And when that wealth falls out, I mean, why are you guys moved from Salt Lake City to here, to Indiana, to help, the startup community? So I think, really, it's start more companies here, and you'll keep more companies here. I mean, not everybody wants to leave. There are fantastic tax advantages from a startup perspective in raising capital here in the state that is unique, that other states don't have. But I think you just need to start more companies here.
Yeah.
What's the question you hope a potential investor never asks?
That's a good question. I'll tell you the worst one that investors ask all the time. It's not that, my view is, running a company, investors can ask anything they want. Nothing's hidden. But investors ask lots of terrible questions. The one bad one you hear all the time is, what are you going to do when Google does this? Terrible question. Or what are you going to do when Amazon decides to compete with you? If you're raising money from an investor and the investor asks you that question, you should reconsider that investor as an investor you want in the business. The reality is that the reason why that's a bad question is that you as a startup, you ought to welcome that competition from a big company like a Google or Amazon, because chances are they're going to fail at it. They're not very good at doing things that don't look like what they already do. And you should welcome that competition, because they're going to help forge the path and tell the story of what you're trying to do to the market. And you just ride that until they fail, and then you win. It's awesome. Welcome it. They're validating it. You're not crazy if they do it. It's all good. So investors ask lots of terrible questions.
Yeah, the worst question we got was, we were out raising our Series B, and we were on Sand Hill Road doing the road show, and I won't mention the name of the firm that we were sitting across the table from. They walked into the meeting 45 minutes late, and that was frustrating, because I'm an early kind of guy, and so by the time like this was start 4, it's already late. We've not started yet. Vince Lombardi time. 45 minutes late, so you're already like, man, I'm going to miss my next meeting. And we got 15 minutes in the presentation, and they said, when are you going to move to San Francisco? And I said, well, we're not. And he says, we're done. And
Wow.
I'm born and raised here. I felt like I had on overalls and a straw hat. It's you feel, as an entrepreneur, you feel like, man, why did I waste my time? You knew I was from here. So I agree with Elliot. Investors ask crazy questions. Just be prepared, and be humble. That's just, you can't react. I didn't say those things I wanted to.
Yeah, just stormed out.
Not my personality. Yeah.
I am curious though, on that trip to San Francisco. This is something we heard quite a bit, that when we launched the Idea Center, that there needed to be a very strong connection to Silicon Valley. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
So when this is just our story, but when we raised our Series B, at the time, NEA, New Enterprise Associates, and Bessemer Venture Partners, BVP, 2 of the largest venture firms in the world, had never stepped foot in the state of Indiana. Both of them flew out to see us. So this misnomer, and I'm absolutely certain that it is a misnomer, that you cannot attract quality funds to the state, is absolutely incorrect. I do think there needs to be a bridge, and so there is a natural vibe around technology, investment, because Silicon Valley is where it all began. And so there's just a plethora of experience and knowledge that you cannot disconnect. And it's really up to you as entrepreneurs to keep that bridge, to network in. The other thing I found with folks out in San Francisco is, we got a meeting with Reid Hoffman because we sent an email. You can get meetings. They are very inviting. They're not Midwest values, or Midwest friendliness, but they will take a meeting. And if you're persistent and you're kind, and you have a good reason, and you can summarize it in 15 minutes, be ready for a 15-minute meeting, they'll take a meeting with you. And so really, those that will succeed, that will get investment from the coast, and we have, it's because you're going to hustle, and you just have to hustle.
Yeah, good answer.
Elliot, I'm curious on yours with the companies you guys have launched in the 2 years. Where is the capital coming from for your companies?
Yeah, all over. It doesn't matter. I mean, the thing, I think it's all flattened, right? Recruiting, capital. In fact, if you're a smart investor on the coast, and a lot of them are looking at the Midwest this way as it's an arbitrage opportunity as an investor. The companies here, the market's underpricing them.
Yes.
Often they're lower priced to operate because of the market that they're in. It's a massive arbitrage opportunity for your investor. Now the market's taking care of that and clearing that out. Over time, that difference won't exist. But right now, there's still some of that. Not the extent it was 10 years ago. There's still some of it though. But a lot more investors are catching on as they're looking for unique deal flow. They're looking outside of the normal places and hopefully not asking investors or entrepreneurs that question when they're moving to San Francisco quite as often as they used to.
Yeah, we're actually finding that quite a bit. We've seen an uptick on inquiries coming to us from coastal cities wanting to understand what's actually happening. So we're actually seeing an influx from the coast trying to understand more opportunities within the Midwest. What makes Indiana a great place to launch a startup?
I think it's the same thing. Some of the same things that make Indiana a great place to live. It's the people, first of all. It's the kind of that can-do, friendly attitude is amazing here in the state. That's a big part of it. I think the cost of living is lower in the state, which makes the cost of operating businesses lower. A quick story: I went to business school in California and started a couple companies when I was in business school. The first time I did, I remember incorporating the company in the state of California as a young grad student. The state of California wanted $800 from me just to file the name of the company, and I just couldn't believe it. Indiana doesn't do that. Now there's still a fee, but it's not, and this is 20 years ago. You can't imagine what it is in California now. Indiana is a very business-friendly place to operate. There are fantastic tax incentives, great. The state bends over backwards to support the creation of new companies in ways that a lot of other places don't. That's a huge advantage. And then the other thing that I think is just the network. One of the things I appreciate about living in Indiana is that it's easy to grasp where the opportunity is, to understand where it is, and to interact with the people you want to know or need to know to make things happen in a way that it's much harder, in my experience, having lived in Los Angeles and Boston and other places. It's a lot harder there to kind of grasp where the opportunity was and who could help me as I was getting started. In Indiana, that's a lot easier, and I appreciate that about living here a lot.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said, so I don't have a ton to add. It's a great place to start a company. The business environment is definitely better than most of the coast, and the taxes are better. You can look that up. So there's just factual reasons. Ultimately, business comes down to, I think CEOs have 2 Ps that are the most important, maybe a third, but purpose of the business, why do you exist? And then the people you hire. Beyond that, capitalism works itself out. So the people are just such a massive component. They are your biggest asset. It is the difference between success and failure based on the people you hire. And having an alignment there is a big deal.
What are some reasons not to start a company in Indiana? That is a very skeptical question to ask. Anyone want to dare take that question?
You want to pay higher taxes. And, there are, right? If I were starting a company in a certain industry where there's a deep embedded group of people with experience that particular industry, it might make sense to do it somewhere else. So, like I said earlier, I don't think it's a competition between states or areas necessarily. There are lots of great places to start companies. I choose to do it here in Indiana, as I think it's a great place for me and my family, and for others that we work with to do it.
Yeah, I was literally thinking, my mind was chasing a rabbit there, but I was thinking, if you're gonna start a surfboard company, maybe not.
Yeah, maybe that's not a good idea.
Or sifting sand. I don't know. I mean, just industry specific. I mean, Indiana's a great place to start a company.
This is an interesting question, and we're starting to see this, but virtual versus non-virtual teams. Have you guys seen a difference in, for example, we're seeing a lot of, when it comes to engineering talent, a lot of that is now being virtual. Are you guys seeing kind of a strategy of who you want to keep around the, the water cooler, who you want at a headquarter versus who you don't? Walk us through how you're thinking through that.
We've got some of my team here. Is there anybody on the team like we wouldn't want to keep around the water cooler? I don't think so. I think we'd welcome them all to come. I don't think like by functional area do some teams work together better than others. I think yes. I think for example, our designers, Sarah's in the audience, one of our designers. I think our designers benefit from that in-person collaboration, just because they're often doing things that are visual, and it helps to be there side by side doing that. So maybe to some extent, some functional areas, but I don't think it's that defined.
We're virtual already. So one of the things, our team is actually in Nashville, Tennessee. Our CTO is in Nashville, or my president of the company is in Nashville. And so we've got a group of folks that are down there the last 2 days. It's probably 10, 15 people, and they're collaborating around data management, data flow, data accuracy, data completeness. So it makes sense to get together. There's just something that's different when you're in person, but we don't separate them.
Of course, you've got a panel up here of people running companies that can operate virtually too. That's not always true. My brother actually lives in California, has a surfboard company in California.
Not in Indiana.
And right, it's helpful for him. He's actually manufacturing things with atoms that he has to move around, and it's helpful to have everybody there in person. Obviously, doing that virtually, I don't know how you would do it. So the type of business you're running, I think, has a big influence on that decision as well, of course.
Someone's going to start a surfboard company
in Indiana.
I'm on it. I'll do it.
I'm curious, if you were to start a company today in Indiana, what kind of, would there be a vertical, horizontal focus to the startup? Where do you see opportunity right now if you were to launch a startup today?
Well, that's what you do. So
yeah, we're launching a half dozen right at this very moment in all sorts of fields. There's one of the things that's fascinating about what we do as a business. So we team up with corporations and universities to launch startups. And every single time we do it, no matter what industry it is, we find so much opportunity to go build startups, so much opportunity. In the last little bit, we've launched a company that's doing carbon credits for dairy farmers. We've got one launching right now that's doing matching organ transplant donors with recipients to reduce rejection rates. Every space, every rock you turn over, there's opportunity. There's so much opportunity. It's such a good time to be building companies right now. The best time ever, in fact, I would argue. So pick something you enjoy, anything. You'll find ideas. There's no end to the ideas and things that can be built by entrepreneurs.
I'll take this down a different route just slightly and say that there's 4 Ps when I sit down and start to talk with founders or folks that are considering starting a startup. There's 4 Ps or 4 questions you need to be able to answer. First one is, what is the problem? Second one is, who has the problem? Third one is, do they know they have the problem? And then fourth one is, are they willing to pay to solve the problem? Einstein once said that if I have a seemingly impossible task to solve and I have a week to solve it, I'll spend 6 days defining the problem, and the answer will inevitably present itself. Where most startups go wrong is that they have not defined the problem, and so they go out and market with the problem they think they want to solve, and they end up doing lots of zigging and zagging, and investors hate that. You learn a lot, but investors don't want to pay to have you learn. They want to pay to have you return. And so, yeah, you can write that down. That was pretty simple.
I like that. That is good.
Can I add on that? Just if there's anybody in the audience who's thinking, I'd love to be an entrepreneur and start a company. I just don't have ideas. I don't know what I would start. I think there is some good advice embedded in that. Is that you start with a customer and a problem. Either one. Start with a problem you've experienced, or start with a customer you can think of. Go figure out what their problem is, how they're solving it right now. That was a good list of questions. you'll find opportunity that way. But you've got to take begin with a problem rather than a solution that you've got in mind, and you'll be more likely to succeed.
I'm curious too on, because I, right when we started this, I talked about, the fundamentals of a startup. The big thing we're coming to, as our fund is maturing, is the question we're bringing up is what actually makes a really good entrepreneur? So I'm curious from your standpoint on both yours, how would you define a good entrepreneur?
Okay, so I'm going to break this apart as an entrepreneur. I don't think you can put in a box a great entrepreneur. I think when you look at great companies through the ages, what you'll find is really good product innovation folks, really good inventors, really good business people of all different ilks. So I think everyone should try to start a startup. Doesn't mean you'll be successful. One of the things that differentiates scale is being able to take an entrepreneur and teach them leadership, which is a big defining move. I love John Maxwell's books on 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. We're taking our team through it right now. That's probably the hardest part, is going from startup phase to scale up phase to then, red ocean phase is probably the hardest thing. But I think anyone can start a business.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's our business is unique too in that we're actually recruiting entrepreneurs. I don't know if anybody does that besides us or other venture studios, but we get ideas for companies, and then we proactively go out and recruit entrepreneurs to run those businesses with us, to co-found those businesses with us. And a couple of years ago, I was talking to the team at another venture studio called Idea Lab. At the time, they'd launched 175 companies, and like 50 of them had successfully exited or IPO'd, sold at that point. Incredible success record. And I asked them, what do you all look for in founders when you recruit founders to run the companies? And it's the same two things that we look for. So I felt good about that. And here's what those two things are. Number one, it is, can this person build and lead a team? Number two, can this person tell a compelling story? And underneath that, there are all sorts of things. Build and lead a team means set a vision, manage people, coach people, all the things that come with that. The other one around tell a convincing story means the ability to bring in investors and customers, to sell, to bring in other employees into the business. But really, in our view, we often boil it down to those two things when we're looking for founders. Now, there's all the other things around, right mix of grit and humility and all those things too, the ability to run through walls. In the end, maybe one other thing on that, it goes back to one of the earlier questions about stress, as I've been sitting here thinking about that question, feeling stressed out about it. The probable result of starting a company is failure. Most likely it's going to fail. And what makes entrepreneurs unique is that they're either completely ignorant of that or they're okay with it. And you see both flavors of entrepreneurs work out to be successful. So again, if you're asking a question, am I wanting to be an entrepreneur? Which one of you might be a good question to ask yourself? Am I ignorant of the risks and what I'm about to do and just see what's going to happen? That's it. I'm going to charge to that. I can work. Or am I aware of it? Elon Musk, I was watching an interview with him the other day. He was asked, why did you go after and start Tesla? You've said before that you thought Tesla was for sure going to fail. Why did you go ahead and start it? And his answer is something, I'm going to massacre it, but his answer is pretty interesting. It was something like, because it was a really hard problem and I thought it was worth solving. And that was like, what an entrepreneur, what an entrepreneurial answer. So good, so good.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, this is a question for you, actually. Okay. Yeah, so if one of the goals of startups in Indiana is good jobs, what is the impact on a community like South Bend if the trend towards remote workforces strengthens?
So that's what I think everybody's struggling with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is how is that going to have an effect? I think that's why your quality of place and the atmosphere that people are living in means everything. And right now, if they're the technology type jobs which can have remote capabilities, which my core business we only have like 10% of the people could do that. The other 90% make things. So we make the surfboards, right? Except ours are made out of metal.
That doesn't sound like a good surfboard.
Yeah, it sinks really well. I think though that is the real challenge. So that's where I think this partnership between universities, companies, and the communities is so important, because it's going to take the community to say, we're going to make this a better place for everybody to live. And then I think you will retain your share of the people. But yeah, you're going to have people then that are going to be living here, that are working for somebody else, but you're getting some of that economic benefit out of them being here and their wages and the things that they spend. So
yeah, and it's interesting. I'm in just a interesting spot too. Has been conversations around, just over the years of, I'm from Utah, to move back, and we've had plenty of conversations. My wife and I, our entire family's back in Utah, but really where we're holding to it is value structures and understanding that the product that our kids are going to become are around us and we can see it. And so that is one of the main reasons why we've stuck around, is because we believe in the value systems that we see within the area. And so that's one of the highlights we have. Last question we'll throw out. So Susan, I'm going to flip it, or Alice, ask it a different way. But if you could give one book, one course, one thing to an entrepreneur, what would it be?
One book is too hard. Clayton Christensen's book is fantastic. I'm a little bit envious that you got to work with him directly. It's pretty cool. It depends on what phase. I think the E-Myth is a good book. It's called The Entrepreneurial Myth, or the E-Myth, old book by Michael Gerber. Good book if you're considering starting a startup, just to understand that there really are three distinct personalities that you need to have in a business: the entrepreneur, the visionary, the manager, and then I forget what the third one is. The technician, I think, is the third. That'd probably be a good book that's somewhat foundational to say, should I enter, or what personality do I have? When you're scaling a business, I like the book Traction by Gino Wickman. Gino Wickman and Patrick Lencioni are two great authors on just general applicable business principles on leadership. I've already mentioned John Maxwell. I think would be just a good book for anyone, whether or not you're starting a company or not, just to understand good leadership principles.
Yeah, those are good. Those are both good ones. Yeah, EOS, awesome. In Traction, entrepreneurial operating system. I don't think you answered right. It depends on the stage and what you need. Personally, there's a few books that I've loved. 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel is fantastic for thinking about kind of how to think differently and be okay with that. And it's the idea that you can, to win in the business of venture capital or in startups, you win by being contrarian and right. You don't win by going along with the crowd and being right. That's a path to failure. So you've got to find ways in which you can figure out some truth about the world that nobody else knows yet, and go down that path and make it happen. Another good one, just on leadership, is you're taking on responsibilities of building a company. Leadership and Self-Deception, little known book, terrible title, but so good about how to lead teams and essentially to take responsibility as you're building a company in appropriate ways. But really, there's nothing, we talk all the time, high op innovation. Just go start building. You'll learn better just taking action than doing anything else. And yes, you're going to make mistakes and screw up, but everybody does. So just go do it and learn as fast as you can. Mm-hmm. Go run as many experiments as you can at the lowest possible cost per experiment. You do that by building, minimizing your downside risk, but taking action. Just go build, go get started. You can read books, sure, that'll help, but not as much as just getting going and start. Go mess up.
Should I go try a metal surfboard and see how that goes?
You'll learn that doesn't work. Figure out something that does.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for their participation. Elliot Parker, Rod Reason, Matt Gardner. Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you for coming today.